Welcome to the Smart Watering Practices webinar. We love to share our knowledge and experiences with you on how to have a successful water-wise landscape. And so I hope today you learn a few things and enjoy this presentation. Let's begin. All right, so this is me. My name is Lisa Pace, and I am a Senior Water Conservation Specialist here at Colorado Springs Utilities. I love helping customers have success with their landscapes while using water wisely. It's a big part of my job, and I love that I'm able to share my experiences professionally with all of our customers. I have a bachelor's degree from Colorado State University in landscape horticulture with a concentration in landscape design and contracting. I have over 20 years in landscape industry experience, and 7 of those years I actually worked for a local landscape company here in Colorado Springs, where I did everything from maintenance manager, installing annual flowers, to selling high-end residential and commercial landscape designs and projects and getting them installed. Some of my other certifications that I have is I have a Colorado Master Gardener certificate. I am a certified landscape technician, and I'm also a certified landscape irrigation auditor. I've been here at Utilities for 7 years, and in that time, I've audited over 200 properties and really done a lot of research and evaluation on customers' water use. So I've been able to balance kind of my hort and installation and construction background now with kind of evaluating from a customer perspective and a water provider's perspective how that water is being used in the landscape, and it's really intriguing to me. So I'm a bit of a nerd about this topic. Our agenda today is we're going to start off talking about our water supply. Why is water so important here in the West? I'm going to walk you through the components of your irrigation system and tell you how you can tweak things or what you need to watch out for to make sure you're getting the most out of the water that's being applied. And I'm also going to help you maximize your water use in terms of scheduling. How should you schedule your program, your sprinklers, to get the most out of that water that's being applied to your landscape? After that, I'm going to share with you a list of resources that we have. I'm going to cover a lot of information today, and it may seem a little overwhelming, but most of this we actually have in fact sheets or videos or other resources available to you on our website. The last thing we're going to do is go over the new water-wise rules, and hopefully by the time we get to those rules, you'll understand why they're so important and how you really can have a great landscape with those rules. So our water supply. Our water supply actually starts out as high mountain snow. And as it melts, some of that water is diverted into our system. We have a huge, complex system, almost like a really large irrigation system, that moves this water from these reservoirs high up into these mountains all the way to our city. It's really cool. We actually have about 27 reservoirs, and this pipe comes from as far as, or is as long as 100 miles. That's how far we move some of that water to our community. If you were to see a map of where our water comes from, this is one that I like. That yellow star is Colorado Springs, and you can see here it's just north of the Arkansas River, where we get 25% of our water is kind of here locally off of Pikes Peak. But the thing that I didn't know until I started working at Utilities is that 70% of the water that we use actually comes from the Colorado River. And that's some of that pipe that comes from 100 miles away and brings us water all the way to our city. We are one of the largest cities in the United States that's actually not located on a major river. So from the day Colorado Springs was starting to be developed in 1871, when General Palmer came to this area and said, this is a great place to build a city. I'm going to build my little London, that's what he called it, here. He knew one of the first things he would need to do was get water, because the landscape in this area didn't necessarily support or attract the people that he wanted. So when we look at our water use, how much of it is currently being used in the landscape? Well, this pie chart here is actually for an average residential customer. So if you took the entire water consumption over 1 year, 35% of all of their use goes to the landscape. The other 65% has gone indoors. Now, we've done a great job as a community of reducing that number. And so 35% is actually it's quite a great number to be using in the landscape. And our landscapes need some water to have the aesthetics and bring us the value that we need. Colorado Springs looked like this originally. There's not a lot of trees or flowering shrubs or plant material that make it seem really inviting. So Palmer brought in that water to actually begin by creating tree-lined roads. So he imported water through the Colorado Canal to water trees in the parkways. That was the very beginning of bringing water to Colorado Springs as we know it. So here in the semi-arid environment, our landscapes need some water. We only get about 16 inches total a year in precipitation. 13 of that falls as rain and about 3 of it falls as snowfall. Now, how much water do most of our lawns need? Well, most of our lawns are Kentucky bluegrass and require about 40 inches of precipitation a year. This means that typically we're watering it anywhere from 24 to 30 inches every year. And that's if you are watering it efficiently. If you have breaks, if you have leaks, if you have inefficiencies in your system, you could actually be watering much more than that. You could be watering 50% more just to get that 24 to 30 inches a year. So, understanding your sprinkler system and how that water is being applied to the landscape is crucial to be a wise waterer. So I'm going to walk you through the components of the system and talk about some new technologies, some rebates we offer, and just some general settings that you should watch out for to help improve your efficiency. And the place I'm going to begin is actually with the controller or clock. It's referred to by both names. I typically call it the controller, but you may know it as your clock. And this is kind of that weird gray box that's usually in your garage somewhere behind some boxes. You think it's on that wall, but you're not real sure. This is the brains of your irrigation system. This is what's telling your different zones to turn on, for what days, for how long. And this is the key component to getting a smart schedule. Now, there are new controllers that are out that actually have capabilities that are just so amazing, and they integrate some smart technology. These types of controllers have been around for over 50 years, which I think is just crazy. And in the last 10 years, that's when they really started to develop those smart settings. So a smart irrigation controller or clock is really one that will automatically adjust the watering based on the weather and sometimes zone parameters. So there's some controllers where you stand in your front yard, because these are usually controlled by your phone. You have your phone out and you say, oh yes, zone 1 is my lawn and it's full sun and it's a slight slope and I have sandy soils and I'm using this type of sprinkler head. And with all of that information, it takes the changing weather that's occurring and it modifies your runtime. Now, if you didn't have a smart controller, I would tell you that you should be changing your program at least once a month to account for the changes in the weather. But if you have this smart controller, it's doing it every day. It's really, really neat just how it's been able to take these complex algorithms and these really advanced settings or calculations that are done to figure out how much water your grass or your tree might need, and it's doing it for you automatically based on those inputs that you're putting. Controllers like this have been shown to save about 16% of the water use in the season, and we are currently offering a $50 rebate for any WaterSense certified smart irrigation controller. I'm going to talk a lot about our rebates, but all in support of how that equipment is really going to help save water in the landscape and help with smart watering practices. But I'll also tell you how to do it with a not smart controller as well. So smart controllers are the brain. These allow you to control it by your phone. They allow it to be adapted to the weather. If you don't have a smart controller, you can still do smart settings. You're just going to be more engaged with that weird box in the corner of your garage that you have to go find. The next device is actually where the water supply is coming from. So when the water comes out of your house, sometimes this device is in the basement, but normally it's on the outside. Where the water comes out of your house, there's a device called a backflow. And that backflow is what prevents water from outdoors from going back inside into your house. It prevents backflow, which basically can happen is if there's water in those pipes, but then you run a dishwasher and a laundry and somebody takes a shower and you lose a lot of water indoor, it actually can siphon this water from outside. And this device is a safety means that is now required by code, and it prevents that from happening. So if you don't have one, I highly suggest it, but any home built on after, I think, late 1990s when they became part of code is required to have one of these. And it is a good safety device that keeps you protected and your water clean and safe. Now, this device, when your system is on, when you charge it up for the season, it is always pressurized. So where that becomes difficult in Colorado is in our springs and our falls. The crazy temperatures we have, it gets really tricky to have a metal piece of pipe and device that's outside exposed to the weather. This year on June 9th, I received 2 inches of snow at my house. That is the latest I have seen snow in the Colorado Springs area. And if my backflow wasn't drained, if this piece of equipment wasn't relieved of that water and that water turned off from inside, it could freeze. And that break is something that we see occur all the time for customers. They forget about that irrigation backflow that's outside and that quick cold snap that came through, and they freeze it and it breaks and it's shooting water everywhere, and now they have a big water bill. So this is really crucial to understand where it's located at your house and when you need to be hyper aware of your system being on, because this one piece could be a point for failure or water leak or water waste if we have those cold snaps. Next, the water moves through that backflow and goes into what's called the manifold. The manifold, or valve manifold, is a series of valves. Those are the black things in that box with the red wires coming out of it. And those valves control a lateral line, which is connected to heads. And I'll show you kind of a picture of what this is. Now, with valves, we don't tend to see a lot of issues in terms of wasting water. There is one thing I do see occasionally, and that's where a valve can be stuck on. And it gets stuck on because there's this little underneath that solenoid, which is that circular white thing in the picture on top of that black square, there is a diaphragm. And that diaphragm can get a little piece of sand stuck in it, and that little piece of sand can cause water to seep and then therefore not close that valve completely. But valves in general, what you need to know is that is the place that the controller turns on and off the water. So it has that piece of wire that's connected to the controller. And so when the controller says, okay, zone 1, turn on, that valve is reacting and it's allowing water to go through. Those valves are connected to lateral lines. So in this drawing, if we were in person right now, I'd have a glass box and I would show you what this looks like. But we've got this drawing that says it's an irrigation plan, and we're going to look at area B, or zone 2, which is in the upper left-hand corner. So here you'll see that valve, which is right there on the drawing, and then you'll see those blue lines. Those are the lateral lines. So that's normally a black poly pipe that's buried in the ground, and it's going to be connected to the heads. The heads are where the water actually pops up and sprays the water. Now, the lateral lines, when you hit those lines, it's going to be a pretty good gush of water that's going to come out when that zone is turned on. Remember, it only happens when the zone is on, because if that valve is closed, there's no water pressure there. So if you're planting a new tree or you're planting a new shrub, then this is a time that you're probably going to figure out where those lateral lines are, because you're probably going to hit them or nick them in that tree or shrub installation. And when you do, just turn on the system, find where that water is coming up, dig it up, and you can replace that pipe pretty easily. But that's another source that sometimes we see. And oftentimes I get the question, but how do I know if one of my pipes underground is leaking? And my short answer is normally you will know. Normally it will bubble up to the top and show you signs that there is a problem down below. Water is always searching for the path of least resistance. And so with irrigation problems, that usually means it's going to come up to the surface. Now, heads are the next piece that I oftentimes see is the #1 leak I find on the property. So when I was out there doing those irrigation audits, over 200 of them, I only had 7 out of the 200 that didn't actually have an irrigation leak. And 95% of the time, there was a head that I would find that was leaking. So sprinkler heads are the devices where they actually pop up, they're connected to that lateral line underground, and they pop up and they throw the water into the air. A rotor is when you have a head that pops up and it has one stream that moves back and forth. That is what a rotor head is. A pop-up spray head is one that pops up and kind of sprays a particular pattern. You can see it have multiple fingers like this nozzle here, or it can just broadcast water over a specific area. Now heads, you actually want to check about once a month. You want to get out there, turn every zone on for 2 minutes, and just visually inspect all the heads. Sometimes a head, the stem where it pulls up, that tall black piece, sometimes that stem can become stuck. And then when you roll over it with your mower, you might shear off that nozzle. This is the most common type of leak I usually find, is a broken nozzle or stem of some kind. And that's the picture on the left. That's what gives you that geyser. If you break those heads, they're going to let you know. You just got to go check for them. The head on the right-hand side, that is a rotor. So that's one single stream coming out that would move right to left. So that was right on the corner of a parking lot. And I'm willing to bet that a car or truck accidentally rolled over that curb right on top of that head, and it broke off at the bottom, or at least cracked it significantly. Because all that water you see on the curb line there, that's actually water from that head. So if you have a break or a leak or a problem, you're gonna see it. You just need to go out there and visually check it once a month. Now, another type of inefficiency that occurs is more of maintenance inefficiencies. So this head on the left is actually what is called a tilted head. This head at some point was moved, was pushed, was somehow tilted over to the far left. And when this happens, normally the first thing you're going to see is a brown area in the grass. And so oftentimes when I'm doing those irrigation inspections, I look down and I see a brown area and I'm thinking we got a tilted head or it's clogged. The nozzle's clogged. Because this type of water isn't being applied evenly. So you're getting one side of that spray pattern that's being thrown into the air and probably drifted off into the wind, and you're going to get a dry spot where that should have been watering, and then you're going to get a really wet spot where that head is basically forcing that water right into the ground. So that type of problem really reduces your efficiency, because the #1 thing people do is usually turn up the time. If I've got a brown spot, I'm going to turn up my time to make sure that it goes away, when actually it could be a physical problem or a mechanical problem with the equipment. The picture on the right is a picture of a buried head. So when your landscape gets to be kind of that 7 to 15 years old, having that grass cut year after year after year, that debris loaded on top, can start to bury the head. And it's very common that I find heads just missing. And so I get my screwdriver out and I poke around right about where it should be. And I oftentimes find this. And as soon as I pull back that turf, the sprinkler works fine. But in the meantime, it was just seeping water all over the sidewalk. And sure enough, this zone they had turned really high up, because actually about 1/3 of the heads on this zone were buried. So maintenance issues like this are a really big common problem that affects somebody's ability to efficient and water wisely. Another problem we see, and this is actually an equipment situation, is something called low head drainage. So low head drainage basically occurs when you have a zone, so heads that are connected by a lateral pipe, and they're on a slope. So here you can see it's a small area of turf grass, and there's probably about a 2-foot rise from the left-hand side, which is the sidewalk, down to this drainage pan or storm drain on the right. And so the heads on the right, which is wherever you see those blue flags and that water dripping down the concrete there, that is actually an effect of low head drainage. So this diagram here does a good job showing what's happening. So on the top picture, you can see when the valve gets turned on and water charges through that line, the sprinkler heads pop up and start watering. Now, when they shut down, those sprinkler heads lose pressure and they come back down. If you have a slope and your lowest heads don't have what's called a check valve, the water in those pipes will actually seep through that lower head and you lose or waste that water that was in that pipe. So every time you fill up those pipes, they charge up, they go, they come down, they drain. And from an efficiency standpoint, this can actually be a lot of water in your system, as much as 10%. So heads with check valves are a really simple exchange. It's just a head that you buy, you unscrew the old one, you screw down the new one and change the nozzle out. And it reduces this amount of water that you're going to see flowing along the gutters or coming out of these systems. And it's literally going to save customers from all this wasted water that they're paying for from just going down the gutter or the storm drain like we just saw in the picture. So our rebate for residential homeowners is up to $5 per head and a maximum of 80 heads per customer. We also recommend heads that have pressure regulation. Our pressure varies greatly across the city. Part of that's due to just the terrain, the natural undulating terrain that we have. And so that high pressure or pressure regulating stem can help reduce the water loss from high pressure as well. So it's kind of a double whammy. And we offer this rebate to help offset the cost of that equipment. We just talked about the brains, which is the controller, the backflow, which is the safety device, the water that moves to the valves, to the manifold, and then how it gets out to the heads through the lateral line. And we've talked about the various ways we can kind of save water or improve functionality along the way. Now I'm going to talk about probably the easiest upgrade you can do and the thing that actually impacts how much water you're using in terms of an equipment standpoint, probably the most. This sprinkler nozzle is a device that goes into the heads. This one is meant for a pop-up spray head. So you just screw it right on top of that black stem that pops up way up high. For rotors, they have the same system. They have a nozzle, but that's actually located on the front of the head when that pops up. It's usually red or gray or blue, and you can unscrew that, take it out, and replace that piece as well. But so the nozzle is what's actually broadcasting the water, what's applying the water to the area. And when you're checking your heads, you want to check your nozzles too, because things like this can have a tendency to occur where somehow that nozzle or that head just gets turned a little bit, and now all of a sudden we're throwing water into the street, or we're washing our neighbor's car, or we're spraying the side of our house. So when you're checking your heads, you also want to check for alignment on your nozzles and make sure that they're functioning correctly. And changing or moving this nozzle is extremely easy. And in fact, I will tell you about a video I have where we show exactly how to do this in an upcoming slide. So the sprinkler nozzle is what is in the spray head, and it's how the water is being applied. There are lots of different types. This first one here on the left is this fixed spray nozzle. So that is going to spray a particular distance and a particular pattern, and it's going to spray the entire area at one time. These types of nozzle apply water really fast, which can be really tricky here in Colorado. The second nozzle or head that we see is the rotor. So the nozzle is actually where that water is coming out of that rotor head. And those actually need to be changed depending on where they're located and what they're spraying. So for example, if you have a rotor head that's in the corner of your front lawn, and then you have one in the middle of your front lawn, the one in the corner is going to spray about a quarter of a circle. So it's going to move back and forth, back and forth, back and forth pretty quickly. But the one that's in the middle of your yard is actually spraying a full circle. So it's going to go around pretty slowly and do 4 times the area. And this is why nozzles are important, because you can't have the same nozzle in that head that's in the middle that's watering really slowly and covering 4 times the area as you do in the corner. You actually need to have a nozzle that applies about 1/4 of the water. So nozzles are really important in terms of your coverage and applying it evenly, and your precipitation rate. So the next nozzle is a really great nozzle that's pretty new to the market. It's called a multi-stream rotary nozzle. This type of nozzle actually goes onto the pop-up spray head in that first picture. But this nozzle has larger droplets that are broadcasted into the air that are much more effective. They don't blow away as easily. They have a more uniform pattern, so that water is being applied more uniformly. And they do a better job of just reaching the next head. So they're going to be watering slower with larger droplets and a more even pattern, and they're about 30% more efficient than that first picture. So that nozzle, we actually have a 2-minute video on that shows you how to upgrade your nozzles on your pop-up spray heads with these type of multi-stream nozzles. And then also we have a rebate, here we go, on this nozzle. So as I told you, it applies water at a slower rate, it has larger droplets. Our rebate is about $4 per nozzle. They're going to cost somewhere between 5 to 7. So we rebate you a good portion of the upfront cost, and they're 30% more efficient. You're going to make up the rest of that cost of that nozzle probably within that first year. Now, I will give you one hint, though. This is included in the video, but I'm going to tell you this right now because it's really important. When you're going to change out your nozzles, you have to look at what the existing nozzles are in your system. So here on the left is a typical spray, pop-up spray nozzle. And so it's kind of hard to see, but right at the top of my fingernail, it says 12Q. So 12 is the radius, how far it's throwing. So it throws 12 feet, and it's 1/4. It's covering 1/4 of a circle. You want to look at and document all your nozzles before you go to the store, because you got to know which ones to replace those with before you go to the store, buy the wrong type, and then come back and never get done because you're too frustrated. And Lisa didn't tell me to do this, so I'm telling you to do this. Got to look at your nozzle type so that you can get the correct nozzles when you go out the first time. And if you want more information on this, we actually have a fact sheet on this as well. That's how to change your sprinkler nozzles. That helps walk you through the best ways to do that. So these nozzles are great. They're gonna improve your efficiency on your existing spray zone without having to invest a lot of money. And that's one of the things that I think is really crucial, is sometimes when I go to sites and I see clogged, sunken, tilted heads, at high precip rate nozzles, and they think, oh, my entire system is terrible. But there's actually a lot of enhancements that can be done for very low cost by doing things like maintenance and changing out your nozzles. So this is one of my top tips for people, is if you have a pop-up spray zone, look at what nozzles you currently have, and if you can upgrade to this type of nozzle, because it's going to save you a lot of water. It's going to make your grass look better, and it's really easy. It's a really easy project to tackle yourself. So next up, we have drip irrigation. All right, so with drip irrigation, my suggestion there is to only water it 1 to 2 days a week. So drip irrigation is 90 to 95% efficient. It applies water right at the ground level, which is where the plants need it. And so you're getting maximum value out of this system. The one mistake I see people make is they run it 4 or 5 days a week. Your plants don't need it. You want to water deep and infrequent with this type of system. So you're going to water it between 45 and 60 minutes, 1 to 2 days a week. And part of that is depending on the time of year. So there was a question earlier about drips. How do I know what drips to put on what plant? And when I say drips, I really mean the emitter. So in this picture at the bottom, you see there's that black pipe. That's a drip pipe. That's probably snaked around on top of the ground through all the plants and trees. And then when you push in these emitters to that pipe, and that's what lets the water out. And when it comes to emitters, you can get half gallon, 1 gallon, 2 gallon, and it goes up from there. And then attached to that emitter, you might put a piece of this smaller black tubing that goes up towards the top of the page. And that's called spaghetti tubing or 1/4-inch drip line. And so that's if your emitter isn't right next to your plant, you're going to install that to get the water there. So until that plant's root system really grows out further, especially if this is a new installation, you want that water right to that root ball of that plant. Don't put it at the crown. Make sure it's on the root ball. What emitters do you put on what plants? And that really is a question of how much water do your plants need. So if I'm using a low water perennial, I might put 1/2 gallon emitter on that. From my experience as a contractor, I found that something that was low water like Jupiter's beard or lavender, we would put 1/2 gallon emitter on that. And then for something that was a moderate water, we might put 2 1/2 gallon emitters on that. And then something that was maybe higher water, we might put a 1 gallon and maybe a half or another 1 gallon if it really liked water. So that's just kind of a spectrum for you, and a perennial is kind of a good place to start, a #1 perennial. But it really depends on the plant's water needs. It also depends on the size of the plant. If you're going to install a 1 gallon small perennial versus a 5 gallon shrub, your shrub is going to need more water than that perennial will. So as a rule of thumb, we like to put 1 emitter on each side of the shrub. So we like to put 2 emitters on that shrub. And in general, if it was a kind of moderate water user, we would use 2 2-gallon emitters for that shrub. If it was a low water, we'd probably do 2 1-gallon emitters for that shrub. And if it was a higher water, we'd probably add a 1/3 2-gallon emitter. But this is where drip is really an art form, because not only can you change the amount of water you're delivering to every plant, but you can also change the frequency. So if you start with this threshold of I'm going to water for 45 minutes or 1 hour, you now can figure out how much water is being applied to each plant because of those number of emitters and the size. But it's really kind of just a spectrum where on the lower water side, you're going to use smaller emitters, and on the higher water side, you're going to increase them. And then with the larger plants, you're going to do more as well. We also have a spray to drip video online. Where it shows us changing an existing spray zone to a drip zone. This is actually my old front yard that we shot it at, and you can see how we did that and how it's really pretty easy. I like to call irrigation Legos for adults because I think it's really something that for the most part snaps and goes together, and it's pretty easy to work with once you feel comfortable with it. Going on, another component that adds a lot of water savings is rain sensors. Rain sensors prevent water during or after a rainfall event. You have 2 types. You have wireless and you have wired. The wired will literally have a wire that goes from your controller out to the device in the field. The wireless is basically transmitting a signal back and forth. The rain sensors have shown to save about 10% of water, and they're eligible for rebates. So if you have a wired rain sensor, we're going to give you $25 or up to $25, which is usually the cost of the device. And if you do a wireless rain sensor, we're going to give you up to $50 for that. The one tip I'm going to tell you here is make sure you check it every year to see if it's working. In our environment, these things only last about 5 years. They have a cork kind of disc on the inside, and I'm not sure if they dry out or what it is in particular about our environment, but over time they can become brittle and stop working. So this is something that I would say check every year, make sure it's working. These devices really do work and can help save you some water. So now we're going to talk about how to maximize your water. And so we talked about your components. We talked about how to make those components more efficient. Now I want to talk about how to schedule and manage your water to be more efficient. And the first thing you need to be aware of is water to the plant's need. So just like where I told you the emitters, a low water plant needs less water and a higher water plant needs more, it's the same thing with frequency. A high water plant, you're going to water 1 to 3 times a week, while a very low water plant, you're only going to water 1 to 2 times a month. Why do we have a range on those? Because you're going to change the number of watering days based off the time of year. So in the heat of the summer, your high water using grass is going to be watered about 3 times a week, where in the spring and the fall, you're only going to water it 1 to 2 times a week. If you have low water plants that are only watered once a week, you know what? If we get a good rain in April, you might not need to water that plant that month. So you can flex a little bit based on the time of year, and that's going to help determine the plant's water needs. You also want to water, and this is with these overhead systems, a 1/2 inch each watering day. This is a general rule, which I'll get into. There's kind of one caveat to this, but we want to water a 1/2 inch to push that water deep into the soil. So with this fixed spray nozzle, which is that first picture, this usually takes around 20 minutes. Some nozzles apply more water than others, so it could be as little as 15 minutes. But normally around 20 minutes is what we see as a pretty good standard there. Rotors actually apply water pretty slowly, so it takes about 45 minutes to apply a 1/2 inch of water with that type of head. And then multi-stream, as I said, it applies water really slowly, so it takes about an hour to get that 1/2 inch. If you really want to know, and this is what I do because I'm a big water dork, if you really want to know how much water is being applied, you should find some catch cans. This Tupperware container is a good example of one because it has straight sides. You need to have straight sides. And you could put, 3 or 4 of these in your zone and figure out how long it takes your zone to water a 1/2 inch. That's really the best way to really know what your precipitation rate is. Now, a question I get all the time is, if I water a 1/4 of an inch 6 days a week, isn't that the same thing? So rather than watering deep and infrequent, I want to water a little bit every day because it's the same amount of water, right? It's the same amount of water, but your plants are not going to be as healthy. And why is that? Because that water is going to promote shallow rooting depth. That water at a 1/4 of an inch isn't going to get as deep as that 1/2 inch of water would. So the trick is really to water deep and infrequent to increase your rooting depth, which creates a more drought-resistant turf grass. And so it can get through the day of hot and dry weather and wait till the next watering day. But if your roots are only 2 inches deep, and I've seen it, it's going to stress out really quickly in our hot summer days. Now, when you take that time, that 15 to 20 minutes, let's say for your pop-up spray head, and so that's how long it takes to water a 1/2 inch, rather than applying those minutes straight through, so turning it on and running for that 15 or 18 minutes, you actually want to do a technique that's called cycle and soak, where you take that full time and you divide it into 2 or 3 cycles, and you wait about an hour to 2 hours in between. This is going to reduce the amount of water that runs off the surface. So in this picture here, you can see water going across that sidewalk, and that's what we're trying to avoid. Remember, all of this is about maximizing what that water's effect is in your landscaping and making it more efficient, the best beneficial use we can get from that water. So this technique is going to help get that water deep. And then just another little tip on watering time here is you want to water before 10 a.m. and after 6 p.m. If you water in the middle of the day, you're actually going to increase the water loss that's done through evaporation. So watering early morning or late night is actually the preferred time as well to help get the most beneficial use out of your water. Now, when is cycle and soak most important? As I said earlier, we have every type of soil here in Colorado Springs, and for those of you that have heavy clay soil, you have what's called a really low soil infiltration rate. And what that means is that water can't absorb water, or that soil can't absorb water quickly. So you need to apply it really slowly in small amounts so that it can actually absorb it and it can soak into the soil. The other situation that you're going to want to do cycle and soaking is if you have extreme slopes. Now, if I came to your house and this was your yard on this crazy of a surface, I would probably advise you to do something different in this space. This is not very conducive to actual usable turf grass. But if you have those slopes, and it's going to be really important that you cycle and soak, and you might end up with more than 3 cycles. If you see runoff occurring at minute 3, that's the limit that you can run that system for. So if you need to water it 15 minutes to get your 1/2 inch, you're going to have to water 5 different cycles. We have a video on cycle soak that's available on our website, and it takes that whole cycle soak kind of method. It dives into it a little bit deeper and actually shows you how we did a catch can test in my old front yard. Okay, I want to do one little tip here at the end I didn't get to talk about earlier. And when I talked about soil types in Colorado Springs, we talked about clay soils and how clay soils you want to water very slowly so that it can soak into the soil. What I didn't get to talk about is sandy soil. Sandy soil has a very high infiltration rate. And that being said, it's still not high enough for those standard spray nozzles to spray water everywhere. Even that amount of water is too fast for sandy soil. But the problem with sandy soil is it doesn't hold or retain a lot of water. So when you're looking at watering 3 days a week in the heat of the summer, something that I would suggest to customers who are having a difficult time keeping their grass green and have the sandy soils is rather than water a 1/2 inch every day, what I would do is I would water 1/3 to 4/10 of an inch in the morning. So like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I would still do the cycle soak concept. I would still try to water deeply, but with sandy soils, they might not be able to hold that 1/2 an inch. So watering at a little bit less of a rate is more appropriate for that type of soil. And then what happens with sandy soil is now you have a 3-day stretch. You have all day Friday, all day Saturday, all day Sunday that your grass has to make it before it gets watered again. So I would take that little bit, that other 1/3 of an inch that I didn't water because I only watered about a 1/3 of an inch each watering day, not a 1/2. Is I would take that last 1/3 of an inch and I would water it Friday night, late Friday night. So that still falls within our 3-day-a-week watering rule, but it helps those with sandy soils not have to go a 3-day stretch. It basically takes 1 day out of that stretch of time and should help alleviate those situations if people are having problems keeping their grass green with sandy soils. So additional resources that are available. One great tool that we offer our customers is My Usage. My Usage is a great way to monitor your water consumption. So you create an account, you create a login and a password, and then you can actually see what, yesterday's water consumption was. So if you watered a 1/2 inch, all your zones on Tuesday, about 24 hours later, you can see those results and actually really start to manage and understand how you're using water at your own house. We also have a lot of sprinkler system fact sheets. So we have a fact sheet on cycle and soaking, a fact sheet on watering according to the season, how to improve your sprinkler system, as well as how to change out your nozzles. And those are all available on our website. And then lastly, I just want to tell you about the WaterWise rules. So this year, our community adopted new WaterWise rules, and these are really 6 rules to help us reduce water waste outdoors. So our very first rule is run sprinklers no more than 3 days a week. So this is kind of that concept in the heat in the summer, that's going to be watering 3 days a week. But you really shouldn't need to water it beyond that. If you have a smart controller that you want more flexibility, you can apply for a program called a water allocation plan that does give you flexibility in this rule. And there's more information on that online. But this rule is really meant to help create a ceiling for how much water we're using outdoors. The next rule, from May 1st to October 15th, don't run your sprinklers during the day. Run them before 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m. You're going to get more value of the water you're using in your landscape. Number 3, don't let water pool or flow across the ground. That is water that you're paying for that is not being used in a beneficial way. Please don't do it. Number 4, repair leaking irrigation systems within 10 days. So if you have a leak, if you spot it, find it, flag it, fix it. Take care of that problem within 10 days. Your yard will be happier and your pocketbook will be happier too, because irrigation leaks can add up really quickly. The last 2 about how we wash things outside. If you're going to wash your car or equipment, use a hose with a positive shutoff nozzle. This way, if you have to step away for a few minutes, you're not leaving that running hose on your driveway. And the last one, only use water for cleaning hard surfaces if it's a matter of public health and safety. If it's just some loose debris, some leaves, some material on top of those hard surfaces, grab a broom or a blower and take care of that way so we can save our precious water resource for those other areas where we need it. And then for additional information, please visit us at csu.org. So I'm happy to answer questions and stick around a little bit, but for those of you that have to leave, thank you so much for joining us. I hope this presentation was helpful.
All right, Lisa. Okay, so we have a few additional questions here. One is that I've been told that if you water at night, you will get molding of your grass. Is that true?
So we do have some funguses that can occur, but it's generally, from my opinion, it's generally not caused by that. Catherine, would you agree?
Yes, I think that our air is dry enough that you can water it anytime and it's going to dry up pretty quickly. Would you recommend a homeowner compressor to winterize an irrigation system, or is it worth it to pay the $50 to $60 to have a professional with a commercial compressor winterize the system?
Easy peasy. It's better to have the professional. The amount of pressure that you need isn't going to be available in kind of those trying to get my hands right here, those can ones that, you know, are about this big that you have at your house. It really has to be a more commercial grade one to get the amount of pressure you need to blow out those components efficiently. And for me, I don't have the garage space to store a compressor, so I would rather just pay that $50, $60 a year and get it done. So I am a firm believer in blowing out your irrigation system. When you first go to install the system, in my experience, it's probably going to start off costing around $3,500 and can be as much as $7 or $8 or $9 grand, depending on how large your property is. So there is that black poly pipe that's used for lateral. It does have some forgiveness qualities where it can freeze and thaw with some water inside of it. But I will tell you from personal experience that even that black poly pipe in the ground can split. I have seen it. I have done it. So I am a big believer in protecting that investment that you're making and blowing out your system every year. It usually costs between $50 and $65. A professional can come out with a large pressure tank and blow it out for you. Or if you have a large pressure tank, you could do it yourself. But I am a big believer in blowing out your system. There are quote unquote self-draining systems. And from an efficiency standpoint, it kind of goes back to that low head drainage issue. Every time those zones run, you're losing that water that's in the pipe. So from an efficiency standpoint and really trying to maximize the water we're using outdoors, I would rather spend that $65 once a year, feel protected in that investment that's made, and know that next year I'm not going to have a lot more additional costs because I have to dig up that pipe, replace my landscape, and change it all to fix the breaks and leaks that I had.
Okay, sounds good. And then the last question that we have that came in that is from Mel, and it says, I have an existing irrigation system, but it doesn't work. Does Colorado Springs Utilities have recommended companies to fix them? And I'm going to add in, if not, how do you find a company to fix it for you?
So we don't recommend or have contractors that we kind of support through a list. What we do is we recommend those that are certified. So I would look at Irrigation Association. They are a national organization that does certification for irrigation techs. Those are where two of mine come from. So I would go to their site to look at their list of who locally has their certifications and what certifications do they have. ALCC, which is Association of Landscape Contractors of Colorado, is another good professional organization that companies take part of and can do actually certification through them as well locally. So I look for certification when I'm looking for an irrigation contractor, and those are the two places that I go to find those lists of those people. As I said, irrigation is somewhat of an art, and it's something that I've really come to love and enjoy. And these little nuances are so crucial to understanding and really getting the most out of the water that we're using in our landscapes. So if you've got questions like this or a particular situation at your house that you want help with, please let us know. Right now, we have horticulturists at the garden on Monday and Wednesday mornings from about 8:30 to about 11. We work with volunteers those mornings. So if you come with your mask and ready to kind of ask us some of those questions, we'd be happy to help you out. And as soon as the center is open, please just come in 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. And we love to discuss these scenarios with our customers and really try to help you get the most out of the water you're using. So with that, thank you, everyone. I hope that was helpful. Have a fantastic Thursday evening, and hopefully I'll see you someday soon.